Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into the very foundation of life on Earth.
Hmm.
We're exploring ecological succession, but not, the recovery of a log forest.
Hmm.
We're talking about the truly fundamental process.
Right. How does biology manage to claim land that is entirely hostile?
Exactly.
Hmm.
I'm talking solid rock, fresh volcanic lava, or glacial till, a substrate that offers zero organic material to start with.
And our mission today is really to understand this primary succession by focusing on the unseen architects, these microscopic pioneers that don't just survive on bare ground.
They create it.
They physically and chemically create soil. We are dedicating this deep dive to lichens, and we're going to analyze how their success helps us understand the entire theoretical framework of ecology.
It's amazing. When you look at a lichen, you might just see a sort of crusty patch on a rock.
Yeah.
But what we've learned from our sources is that we are looking at the ultimate microengineers. They are the essential primary successional pioneers.
And they make otherwise uninhabitable ground hospitable to everything else that follows, including the higher plants, the tracheophytes.
So this transition from just inorganic rock to a biological base, it starts the moment the lichen colonizes the substrate.
Instantly. It kicks off a process called biodeterioration. It's a process where the lichen simultaneously employs, well, both physical force and chemical agents.
Okay, let's start with the physical force. They have to anchor themselves somehow.
Correct. So the first method is physical biodeterioration. It's sometimes called the chisel action.
The chisel action, okay.
Lichens use these multicellular root-like anchoring structures called rhizines. Now, their job is purely structural.
Just hold on.
Hold on. But the phalli, that's the main body of the lichen, they act like a sponge. They expand and contract dramatically with changes in moisture.
How dramatically?
We're talking up to 300% of their dry weight.
Wow. That's a huge constant stress applied right at the rock interface.
It is. This probing and movement by the rhizines, it fragments the rock surface, creating these micro cracks and pores right underneath the thallus. It's like slow-motion demolition.
And we have proof of this.
We have visual proof. Scanning electron microscope SEM imaging studies on recent lava flows at places like Mount Etna in Sicily and Mount Vesuvius.
Right.
They've confirmed that the rock substrate beneath the lichens is just riddled with these minute fractures.
And I've got to imagine that if you add in a cycle of freezing and thawing, this physical action just gets accelerated.
Dramatically, absolutely. In cold areas like the Arctic, those new microcracks let water seep in. When that water freezes, it expands.
Ice wedge action.
You got it, accelerating the physical weathering. So the lichen sets the stage for rapid breakdown even when it's dormant.
So that's the physical elbow grease.
Yeah.
But the really fascinating part to me is the chemical process. They aren't just breaking it apart.
No, they're actively dissolving it. They're extracting the raw chemical components necessary for soil.
So how does that work?
Well, chemical biodeterioration is actually the more effective weathering agent. The fungal component, the mycobiont, it secretes these highly active metabolic byproducts. And the star player here is oxalic acid.
Oxalic acid.
Yeah, studies in northeast China showed that oxalic acid, along with another called succinic acid, they promoted the release of key ions, sodium, potassium, aluminum, iron, calcium, right out of granite.
So the fungal half is the chemical specialist, dissolving the fundamental bonds of the rock itself.
It is. But the photosynthetic half, the photobiont, it plays a role too.
What does it do?
It contributes by releasing these acidic mucopolysaccharides. They're large biological polymers that help increase metal mobility, and crucially, they help retain moisture.
Making those liberated ions more accessible.
Exactly. And on top of that, the lichen's own respiration is a factor. Respiratory CO2 reacts with the water held by the thallus, and that creates carbonic acid.
Which lowers the pH.
Lowers the internal pH and enhances the whole dissolution process.
I remember the sources mentioning an older idea about this, something that we now know isn't quite right.
Yes, for a long time it was thought that these weak insoluble acids specific to lichens, like dipsides and dipsidones, were the main players.
But they're not.
The current consensus shows they play a very minor role. It's really the highly active and soluble oxalic and carbonic acids that are driving that fundamental chemical transformation of the rock.
Okay, so once the rock is chemically dissolved and physically fractured, the lichen converts that raw material into usable components. This is where soil actually begins to form.
This is it, and that leads us to decomposition and nutrient retention. Lichens contribute organic matter through in situ decomposition.
So dying in place.
Right. and also through litterfall. And this isn't a trivial amount. A California study showed that in an area with 100% canopy cover, the annual contribution from decomposing lichens was over 1,000 kilograms per hectare.
That is a significant amount of organic mass in an ecosystem that, by definition, started with none.
Exactly. And they don't just provide material. They change the chemistry of decomposition for other organic matter in the environment.
How so?
They actually slow the decomposition rate of other organic litter, like oak leaves, for instance. But this slower breakdown enhances the retention of crucial nutrients,
Specifically nitrogen.
specifically nitrogen, in this pioneer ecosystem. Lichens also leach enzymes like lactases, which are key to humification.
That's the process of tuning organic matter into humus, right? The good stuff in soil.
The essential humic substances for tree soil structure. Yeah.
And there's one last piece to this soil building puzzle. Their role is a kind of net.
That's particle entrapment. Lichens function as intersystem nutrient sinks. They trap wind-blown particles. For example, lichens near the Mediterranean Sea, they show high concentrations of sea salts like sodium and potassium.
So they're catching nutrients from the air.
From the air and from the substrate itself.
Yeah.
And crucially, they transform insoluble minerals like feldspar, a major component of continental crust, into nutritious bioavailable forms.
So they're turning unusable rock into something the next generation of plants can actually absorb.
And they do it much faster than later colonizers, like mosses can. They're turning it into chelated metals and clay minerals.
It's just remarkable how much fundamental work this tiny organism does. This gives us the context we need to zoom out a bit. How does this intricate chemical action fit into the broader theory of ecological change, the concept of succession?
Well, succession is the predictable, though constantly shifting change in species composition over time. The key concept here is the ecosystem, a term Sir Arthur Tansley coined to define that functional unit where biotic and abiotic factors interact.
And succession is just the engine driving that unit forward.
That's it. And the distinction between the two types of succession is absolutely critical.
Right. It's primary and secondary.
Exactly. The primary process we just described, starting in an area absent of soil, like our bare rock example, that is primary succession.
And secondary.
Secondary succession happens after a disturbance, like a fire or clear cutting, where the soil and seed bank are still intact.
So because the soil's already there, it's a much, much faster process.
Comparatively, yes. Much faster.
This journey from lichen on bare rock all the way to a climax forest community. That has a name, right? The xeric succession pathway.
That's the one. And the idealized sequence itself is called a sear.
The sear.
And it begins with the microlichens, which kick off soil formation. They're followed by larger foliose lichens, adding more organic matter. As soil builds, we see bryophytes, or mosses.
And then bigger and bigger plants.
Followed by small herbaceous plants, then small shrubs, eventually leading to the long-lived tracheophytes, the climax community.
And it's important to note, right, that whether it starts dry, like on rock, or wet, it usually ends up in a similar place.
Generally, yes. Both dry xeric and wet hydric successions tend to move towards a similar final state, a mesic or moisture-balanced community.
Now, while the role of lichens is pretty much accepted as critical, our sources did mention a contrasting view. What's the main point of contention there?
Well, some scientists argue that in certain environments, like at a major volcanic site, the sheer amount of dust and debris from the explosion might be enough to act as an initial soil layer.
So in that scenario, other plants could just jump in without the lichen.
In that scenario, bryophytes and vascular plants could potentially colonize directly, maybe bypassing the centuries-long process required for lichens to build a substantial base.
But the consensus is still with the lichens.
The overwhelming consensus still credits the lichen with that necessary chemical transformation of consolidated rock that enables all subsequent life.
Okay, to put these timelines in perspective, let's look at a few case studies, starting with that classic research on dune environments.
Right, we're moving to the early 1900s with Henry C. Cowells's really influential study on the Lake Michigan dunes.
And he used a clever method.
He did. He pioneered what's called space-for-time substitution. He compared the younger dunes closest to the lake with progressively older dunes further inland to sort of watch the slow process of succession unfold over long periods.
And the challenge of those young dunes is it's comparable to bare rock, but with a big stability problem.
Precisely. The environment is so challenging. You have unstable quartz sand, it's highly deficient in nitrogen, and it retains water very poorly.
So the pioneer species needed a special trick.
It needed unique structural adaptations to stabilize all that shifting sand. And that species was beachgrass, Ammophila breviligulata. It uses rhizomes.
Those horizontal underground stems.
Exactly, to rapidly spread and stabilize the environment. It continually sends out new roots along its stem as it gets buried by the sand.
And unlike the millennia-long process on rock, this dune process is rapidly reversible.
It is. A little bit of human traffic or a severe storm can disrupt those fragile root systems, leading to blowouts that essentially reset the whole area back to an earlier stage.
Now, if we want to see succession happen on a human observable timeline, we often look at disturbances caused by what we call ecosystem engineers.
Like the beaver, Castor canadensis, they are a classic keystone species. By building dams, they convert streams into ponds and just drastically change the hydrology.
Kicking off aquatic secondary succession.
Yes, increasing habitat area and depth, which you can track using indicator species like Daphnia, which thrive in older, late-stage ponds.
And there's a perfect, rapid example of terrestrial secondary succession from the Talladega Wetland Ecosystem after a dam failed there.
That was in 1996. The dam failure drained a pond, giving researchers a remarkable look at succession in fast forward. Because the soil was intact, recovery was quick.
How quick?
Within 1 year, soft brush like Juncus effusus dominated. By 2000, shrubs were established, and by 2008, it had already transitioned into a hardwood forest.
So from disturbance to forest in just over a decade.
That's it. It's an amazing example.
That rapid secondary succession gives us a really good contrast. Let's go back to primary succession and look at the monumental timescale of glacial retreat, where resource limitation is the key.
Right. When a glacier recedes, it leaves behind this till that is hard, clean, and desperately poor in nitrogen.
So nitrogen is the limiting factor.
It is. So the first plants that can succeed are the ones that can fix atmospheric nitrogen, like lupine or the plant dryas, and alder trees.
This succession sequence is like a beautiful natural experiment. It demonstrates competition and turnover over hundreds of years.
It truly is. The alders, being highly effective end fixers, they cover the till within 20 to 30 years and just dramatically increase the total soil nitrogen.
But then they create a new problem.
They do. They soon displace the earlier pioneer species because of light competition. Light becomes the new limiting resource.
So the very plant that solved the first resource problem creates the next limiting resource challenge for the whole ecosystem.
Exactly. And this opens the door for shade-tolerant conifer spruce and western hemlock, which then replace the alders after about 300 to 500 years.
And then, interestingly, the nitrogen levels change again.
They do. Once the conifers dominate, the overall nitrogen concentrations in the soil actually begin to decline again.
And then we get to the stage that shows the fundamental, maybe, instability of nature, the point where the climax community sets up its own destruction.
This is a fascinating part. In these cool, moist climates, sphagnum mosses develop in the shade of the large conifers.
And sphagnum is basically a biological sponge,
An exceptional one. It retains enormous amounts of water and gradually causes the water table to rise.
which drowns the tree seedlings.
It results in the drowning and failure of regeneration of the spruce and hemlock seedlings, and eventually it even kills the mature trees. The climax community successfully paved the way for its own demise by altering the hydrology.
That whole idea that the environment is always changing, never truly stable, it perfectly encapsulates this great philosophical debate in ecology. It contrasts two fundamental models of how communities organize themselves.
This is the core difference between the Clementsian view and the Gleasonian view.
Let's start with Clemens.
Frederick Clements proposed that communities are these discrete superorganisms. They follow deterministic, predictable pathways toward a single, stable climax state.
And the transitions between those states are sharp.
Very sharp. In his view, they happen in narrow zones called ecotones.
But the contrasting model, which is now more widely accepted, suggests a more individualistic view, which seems to align perfectly with the specialized chemical actions of the lichen we started with.
That is the Gleasonian view, or the individualistic hypothesis from Henry Gleason. He argued that species distribution isn't governed by some predictable superorganism.
It's about each species for itself.
It's based on the unique environmental tolerances of each individual species and the pure chance of dispersal. So community composition varies continuously along an environmental gradient. It's the continuum concept.
So if every species is succeeding based on its own unique chemical and physical tolerances, just like the lichen does, that gives strong credence to Gleason.
It does, and modern, large-scale studies ultimately supported his model.
What kind of studies?
Studies mapping species distribution against gradients, like Robert H. Whitaker's work in the Smoky Mountains, they consistently found that each species distribution was unique and independent.
Which led to the broad acceptance of Gleason's model.
Yes, succession is not a fixed march. It's a constant resorting of individuals based on who can handle the current conditions.
It's amazing that we can even model these complex processes mathematically, especially things involving intense competition over long time scales.
Yeah, we see that in the application of interacting particle systems to succession. The models can abstract these ecological interactions.
And the example in the sources was bracken versus beech trees.
A classic competition. Bracken, Pteridium aquilinum, which needs sunlight, versus the European beech, Fagus sylvatica, which needs shade and has a large seed bank. The outcomes are governed by their respective birth rates. Lambda 1 for bracken and lambda 2 for beech.
And what are the three stable outcomes that the model predicts?
The model suggests three possible ecological balances. First, it's possible the whole population dies out, the all-empty state.
Okay.
Second, if the beech's birth rate, lambda 2, is high enough supercritical, the shade-tolerant beech wins entirely. It just dominates the system.
And the third?
The third, and the most complex dynamic, is coexistence of both species. This requires the bracken's birth rate, lambda 1, to be high enough, and the beech's rate to be relatively low. That allows both to maintain a foothold, especially when you model it across a two-dimensional space.
So what does this entire scope of research really mean when we connect the microscopic, acid-driven work of the lichen to the monumental, continental-scale event of glacial succession?
It means that every change, whether it's driven by microscopic acids breaking down feldspar or by large-scale keystone engineers like beavers, it influences the environment in an individualistic way. It's constantly shifting the balance for subsequent life.
So succession isn't a fixed destination.
Not at all. It is a dynamic, continuous, and highly individualistic process driven by specific environmental tolerances and continuous disturbance. It fully supports Gleason's theory.
And the lichen's work.
The work of the lichen, converting that inorganic rock to bioavailable nutrients, is the fundamental starting point that allows that entire dynamic system to unfold.
It provides the initial organic anchor. But that vulnerability exposed by the sphagnum mosses in the Glacier Bay example is just profound.
It is. It shows that even a dense, established forest, a classic Clementsian climax community, contains the seeds of its own destruction. It changes the very conditions that allowed it to thrive, which leads to the failure of tree regeneration as the water table rises.
And this leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to explore.
In a world of increasing climate and geological flux where change is the only constant, is the concept of a truly stable, final climax community ever achievable? Or is constant, unpredictable change the only true climax state?